I always thought of our marriage as a curated gallery, smooth, expensive, and perfectly lit. Jason was a rising star at his law firm, the kind of man who wore three-piece suits like armor and possessed a smile that could settle a multi-million-dollar dispute before the first cup of coffee was served. We had been married for 7 years, and in my mind, those years were a steady climb toward a summit of domestic bliss. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when the gallery walls began to crumble. I was curled up on the velvet chaise lounge in our living room, my iPad resting against my knees. Our golden retriever, Barnaby, had done something hilarious with a tennis ball earlier that morning, and I wanted to find the photo to send to my sister. I opened the family sharing album, humming to myself. Jason and I shared everything: bank accounts, a calendar, and this digital space where our lives merged into a stream of vacations, dinner parties, and sunset selfies. But as I scrolled past a photo of our Christmas tree, my thumb hit a folder I hadn't noticed before. It was titled simply Assets, tucked away in a corner of the library. Curiosity, that flick of a match in the dark, nudged me to tap it. I expected spreadsheets or boring photos of property lines for tax purposes. Instead, the screen filled with a grid of images that turned my blood to ice. The photos weren't of spreadsheets. They were of a house I didn't recognize, a sleek, ultra-modern glass and stone cabin tucked away in the woods. And in every photo, there was Jason. But he wasn't alone. He was with Elena, his senior law partner, the woman he had described as a work mother and a formidable mentor. In one photo, they were clinking wine glasses on a deck overlooking a misty valley. In another, they were wrapped in a single blanket on a plush outdoor sofa. But it was the last few photos that broke me. They were intimate, the kind of photos you only take when you think the world is looking the other way. The timestamp on the most recent one was from last weekend. The law retreat Jason said was mandatory for his promotion. Looking for something, Chloe? The voice was like a sudden frost. I jumped, the iPad slipping from my hands and thudding onto the rug. Jason was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, his tie loosened, a half-empty glass of scotch in his hand. He hadn't made a sound coming in. I was just looking for a photo of Barnaby, I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I felt nauseous. He walked over, his movements slow and deliberate, like a predator who knew the prey was already cornered. He picked up the iPad and looked at the screen. His expression didn't change. There was no flicker of guilt, no stutter of an apology. His face simply smoothed into the cold, impenetrable mask he used in the courtroom. "I told you not to mess with the shared settings, Chloe," Jason said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "I was going to tell you about the house. It was supposed to be a surprise." "A surprise?" I stood up, my legs shaking. "Jason, you're in bed with her. In a house I didn't even know we owned. How is that a surprise?" "It's an investment," he said, stepping closer. "Elena and I have worked hard for that firm. We've built a life there. A life you enjoy every single day." "I don't enjoy a life built on lies," I snapped, my voice rising. "I want a divorce, Jason. I'm taking the dog, I'm taking my half of everything, and I'm making sure the board knows exactly how you and Elena spend your retreated time." For the first time, a crack appeared in his mask. His eyes darkened, a flicker of genuine malice sparking in the depths. He didn't say anything for a long moment. He just stared at me, calculating the cost of my silence against the ruins of his career. "You're upset," he said finally, the coldness returning. "You aren't thinking clearly. Why don't I make us some tea? We'll sit down and talk about this like adults." I should have run then. I should have grabbed my keys and Barnaby and bolted for the door. But 7 years of trust is a hard habit to break. I sat back down, watching him walk into the kitchen, his back straight and his hands steady. I thought we were going to negotiate. I didn't realize I was already dead. The kitchen was filled with the rhythmic whistling of the kettle, a sound that usually brought me comfort. Now it felt like a warning siren. Jason moved with a fluid, haunting grace as he prepared the tea. He used the fine porcelain set we'd bought on our honeymoon in Kyoto. "Here," he said, placing a delicate cup on the coffee table in front of me. "Chamomile. It'll help with the nerves." I stared at the steam rising from the liquid. My mind was spinning, trying to figure out where I would go, which lawyer I would call, how I would explain this to my parents. I picked up the cup, the warmth of the porcelain seeping into my frozen fingers. "I'm serious, Jason," I said, looking him in the eye. "I'm leaving tonight." "Drink your tea, Chloe," he replied. He sat in the armchair opposite me, his glass of scotch long gone, his hands folded in his lap. He watched me with a terrifyingly blank stare. I took a sip. It tasted slightly bitter, a metallic tang hitting the back of my throat. I frowned, looking down at the amber liquid. "This tastes off." "It's a different blend," Jason said. "Elena brought it back from London. Just finish it." I took another 2 sips, and that's when the world began to blur. The edges of the living room softened, the colors bleeding into one another. My head felt heavy, as if it were being filled with lead. I tried to set the cup down, but my hand wouldn't follow my commands. The porcelain clattered onto the table, tea spilling across the dark wood. "Jason." I slurred, my tongue feeling thick and useless. "What did you—" "You don't understand the stakes, Chloe," he said, his voice sounding like it was coming from the end of a long tunnel. He stood up and walked toward me, but he didn't reach out to help. "Elena and I are on the verge of taking over the firm. A divorce would be messy. A scandal would be ruinous. I can't let you burn down everything I've built." I tried to stand, but my legs buckled immediately. I slumped onto the chaise, the darkness pressing in from the corners of my vision. Through the haze, I saw Jason walk over to the fireplace. He picked up the decorative lighter we kept on the mantel. "The wiring in this house has always been a bit faulty," he whispered, his voice a low hum. "And you've been so depressed lately, Chloe. Everyone knows you've been struggling. A tragic accident, an electrical fire while you were sleeping off a heavy dose of, well, whatever the autopsy finds." I tried to scream, but only a soft moan escaped my lips. I watched, paralyzed, as he walked over to the silk curtains and flicked the lighter. A small, orange flame danced for a moment before catching the fabric. The fire spread with a terrifying hunger. The room filled with the scent of burning silk and wood. Jason stood by the door, watching the flames for a moment, his face illuminated by the flickering light. He looked like a stranger, a monster wearing my husband's skin. "Goodbye, Chloe," he said. He turned and walked out, the sound of the front door locking behind him echoing like a gavel. The heat began to crawl across the floor. The smoke was thick now, a heavy gray blanket that made my eyes sting and my throat burn. I fought the darkness, my fingers clawing at the velvet of the chaise, but the drug was too strong. I felt the heat reach my feet, heard the roar of the fire as it climbed the walls. My last thought wasn't of Jason or the betrayal. It was of a face I didn't know, a man in a yellow helmet, his eyes full of a desperate, grieving light as he reached through the smoke toward me. "I've got you," he whispered in my mind, even though I knew no one was there. Then, there was only the heat, the roar, and a final, merciful blackness. I woke up with a gasp that felt like a physical blow to my chest. My lungs burned, the ghost of smoke still stinging my throat. I flailed, my hands hitting something cool and smooth. Not velvet, not fire. "Chloe? Honey, are you okay?" I froze. That voice. I turned my head slowly, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm. Jason was sitting in the driver's seat of his black SUV. He looked younger, the sharp lines of his face softened by a smile I now knew was a lie. He wasn't wearing his 3-piece suit. He was in a casual linen shirt. "You were out for a second there," he said, reaching over to pat my knee. "Must be the excitement."
"Look.
We're here." I looked out the window. My breath caught. We were idling at the end of a long, winding driveway. At the end of it stood the glass and stone cabin from the hidden folder. It looked brand new, the stone pristine and the glass shimmering in the afternoon sun. "The vacation home," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "Our sanctuary," Jason said, his eyes gleaming with a terrifyingly familiar light. "Today's the day, Chloe. We signed the closing papers, and this place is officially ours. A fresh start for us." I looked down at my hands. They were shaking. I checked my phone. The date glared back at me. May 12th, 2024. I was back. 2 years before the fire. 2 years before the iPad. 2 years before Jason murdered me in our living room. You look like you've seen a ghost, Jason said, his hand lingering on my knee. I had to fight the urge to scream and scramble out of the car. The touch of his skin felt like a brand. I just had a dizzy spell, I said, my voice trembling. Must be the heat. Well, let's get inside and sign the papers, he said, opening his door. The realtor is waiting. I watched him walk toward the house, his gait confident and relaxed. He had no idea I knew. He had no idea I had felt the heat of the flames he'd set. He was still the perfect husband, and I was the perfect wife. But the curated gallery was gone. I was in a war zone now. I stepped out of the car, the mountain air feeling cold against my skin. I couldn't just run. Not yet. He was a powerful lawyer with a network that spanned the state. If I left now, he'd find a way to destroy me legally, or worse, he'd finish what he started in the other life. I needed a plan. I needed protection. And most of all, I needed the man from my final dream. That night, while Jason slept soundly beside me, the sleep of a man with no conscience, I sat in the dark of the guest room, staring at the moonlight hitting the trees. I remembered the name on the news reports I'd seen in the periphery of my old life. The hero firefighter who had been the last one out of a collapsing building. Caleb Thorne. I didn't know if he was the man from the smoke, but I knew his name. I knew the station he worked at. And I knew that in a world where my husband was a killer, I needed someone who knew how to fight the fire. I'm going to ruin you, Jason, I whispered to the empty room. I'm going to burn your world down, and this time, I'm not the one who's going to turn to ash. The fire station was a red brick fortress on the edge of the city, smelling of diesel, wet pavement, and old coffee. I stood across the street for nearly an hour, clutching my coat around me. My heart felt like it was trying to escape my chest. What was I supposed to say? Hi, you don't know me, but you failed to save my life in a future that hasn't happened yet. I was about to turn away when a garage door rattled upward. A group of men in blue uniforms emerged, washing down a massive engine. And then I saw him. He was taller than he looked in the news clippings. He had dark hair, eyes that seemed to carry a permanent weight of weariness, and a scar that ran jaggedly along his jawline. Caleb Thorne. As if he felt my gaze, he looked up. His movements stilled. He dropped the hose, the water splashing against his boots. He didn't look confused or annoyed. He looked haunted. I crossed the street, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. As I got closer, the noise of the city seemed to fade away. There was only the sound of my own breathing and the look on his face. "Can I help you, ma'am?" one of the other firefighters asked, but Caleb stepped forward, silencing him with a quick gesture. "I know you," Caleb said. His voice was a low, gravelly hum that resonated in the center of my chest. "No, you don't," I whispered. "We've never met." "I know," he said, shaking his head slowly. He looked at me with an intensity that made me feel exposed. "But I've been dreaming about you for 3 nights. A house fire, a woman on a chaise. I reach for her, but the roof comes down. I felt the air leave my lungs. You remember?" "I remember the failure," he said, his voice dropping so the others couldn't hear. "I remember the smell of chamomile and smoke." "Who are you?" "My name is Chloe Vance," I said, my voice finally finding its strength. "And I'm the woman who died in that fire. But right now, I'm very much alive, and the man who killed me is sitting in an office downtown, planning his next move." Caleb didn't call for a doctor. He didn't laugh. He simply nodded toward a small diner at the corner. "My shift is up in 10 minutes. Meet me there. Don't go back to him until we talk." I sat in a corner booth of the diner, my hands wrapped around a cup of black coffee. When Caleb walked in, he looked different without the uniform, more human, but no less formidable. He sat down opposite me and leaned in. "Tell me everything," he said. I told him about the hidden folder. I told him about Elena and the law firm. I told him about the drugged tea and the lighter. As I spoke, I watched his hands clench on the table, his knuckles turning white. I saw the photo of your death in the news, Caleb admitted, his voice a low rasp. In whatever that was. I saw the aftermath. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I quit the department 2 weeks later in that timeline because I couldn't get your face out of my head. You loved a ghost? I asked, a strange warmth blooming in my chest despite the horror of the conversation. I felt a pull, he said, looking me straight in the eye. Like I was supposed to be there. Like I was meant to save you. Then save me now, I said. He thinks I'm his trophy. He thinks I'm a variable he can delete when I become inconvenient. I need to catch him, Caleb. I need to put him somewhere he can never hurt anyone again. Caleb reached across the table and covered my hand with his. His skin was rough, calloused, and warm. I'm not a firefighter anymore, Chloe. As of 5 minutes ago, I'm your shadow. He's not going to get near you. I'll be the one watching the monitors this time. Living with Jason during those weeks felt like being an actor in a play where the stage was rigged with explosives. Every morning, I watched him tie his silk necktie in the mirror, the same hands that, in another life, had lit a fire while I lay drugged and helpless. I had to force myself to breathe normally when he leaned in to kiss my cheek, the scent of his expensive aftershave, making me want to gag. You've been remarkably focused on that new camera of yours, Chloe, Jason said one evening, peering over his reading glasses at me. I was sitting on the rug, meticulously cleaning a lens I didn't actually know how to use. Is the interior design hobby already a thing of the past? I want to document the progress of the vacation home. I lied, my voice steady despite the frantic thudding of my heart. I thought I'd create a coffee table book for us. A record of our sanctuary. That's a charming idea, he said, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. Just make sure you don't get in the way of the contractors. Elena and I have a lot of sensitive work to finalize there before the firm's merger. He had no idea that the contractors he was so worried about were actually Caleb, who had spent the last 3 nights crawling through the cabin's crawl spaces to install eyes and ears in every room. The next day, I met Caleb in a secluded corner of the city park. I sat on a bench, wearing oversized sunglasses, while he leaned against a tree a few feet away, looking like just another civilian enjoying the sun. We spoke through tiny, flesh-colored earpieces. He was there until 2 a.m. last night. Caleb's voice crackled in my ear. It was a low, grounding rasp that made the world feel slightly less tilted. Elena arrived shortly after he did. Chloe, they aren't just sleeping together. I saw them through the kitchen feed. They were moving crates into the basement safe. It looked like bundles of cash and ledgers. He told me it was a sanctuary for us, I whispered, clutching my purse. He's laundering money through the property, isn't he? It looks like it, Caleb said. I could hear the grim set of his jaw in his voice. But there's something worse. I did a deep dive into the firm's history. For years ago, an associate named Marcus Miller went missing. The official story was that he had a breakdown and fled the country. But I found a police report that was never followed up on. A witness saw Jason's car near the construction site where Miller was last seen. He's already a murderer, I said, a cold shiver racing down my spine. The fire wasn't his first time. It was just his way of cleaning up a non-factor like me. I won't let it happen, Chloe, Caleb said. He turned his head slightly, his gaze locking onto mine from behind his shades. I've been watching the perimeter of your townhome every night. He's not going to touch you. Why, Caleb? I asked, the question I'd been holding back finally spilling out. Why give up your life for a woman who is, for all intents and purposes, a walking ghost? Caleb walked over and sat on the edge of my bench, though he kept his eyes on the path ahead to maintain our cover. In that other timeline, when the news broke about the fire, they showed a photo of you from a charity gala, he said softly. I sat in my apartment for hours, staring at it. You were surrounded by people, but you looked like you were drowning in plain sight. I felt a pull then, a grief I couldn't explain. When I saw you at the station in this life, I realized it wasn't just a dream. It was a second chance for me, too. I'm not just protecting you because it's right. I'm doing it because, well, I think I've been looking for you since before I even knew your name. I reached out, my fingers briefly brushing his hand on the wooden slat of the bench. His skin was warm and rough, a stark contrast to the cold, clinical world Jason had built for me. For the first time, I didn't feel like a victim waiting for the end. I felt like a woman with a protector who was willing to walk through fire to keep her safe. "Stay close, Caleb," I whispered. "I'm right here, Chloe," he said, "and I'm not going anywhere." The glass sandstone cabin, which Jason called our sanctuary, felt more like a beautifully constructed tomb every time I stepped inside. It was a masterpiece of modern architecture. Open spaces, floor-to-ceiling windows, and clean lines. But to me, it was a maze of secrets. Caleb and I had spent the last 3 days turning the house into a panopticon, a place where every whisper and every exchange of illicit cash would be etched into digital memory. "Last one," Caleb whispered through my earpiece. I was standing in the kitchen, pretending to organize the pantry, while he worked in the attic crawlspace above the master bedroom. The smoke detector in the hallway now has a 4K pinhole lens. It covers the entrance to the basement stairs and the primary living area. If they move a single cent, we'll see the serial numbers. "How much time do we have?" I asked, my voice low. I kept my eyes on the driveway through the kitchen window. Jason was at a partnership meeting, but his schedule was as fluid as his morality. "5 minutes until I'm clear," Caleb replied. "I've synced the feed to your iPad and the burner. Remember, Chloe, don't open the app unless you're on the encrypted VPN I installed. If Jason's firm has a sniffer on your home Wi-Fi, he'll see the traffic." "I know," I said, my heart fluttering. "Just get out of there, Caleb. I can't breathe while you're in this house." A few minutes later, I saw a shadow slip through the back tree line. Caleb was gone, vanishing into the woods like the ghost he claimed to be. I took a deep breath, smoothing my hair and checking my reflection in the stainless steel fridge. I looked like a wealthy, bored housewife. I didn't look like a woman who was currently recording her husband's downfall. The trouble started 3 hours later, back at our townhome. I was in the guest room, the door locked, staring at the burner phone Caleb had given me. The screen showed the cabin in crystal-clear night vision. It was empty for now, but the high-tech silence was haunting. Suddenly, I heard the heavy thud of the front door closing downstairs. Jason was home early. I scrambled to hide the phone, shoving it deep into the crevice of the guest bed's upholstered headboard. I barely had time to unlock the door and walk toward the hallway before I ran into him. Jason didn't look like the triumphant lawyer who had left this morning. His tie was undone, hanging like a noose around his neck, and his eyes were sharp, scanning the room with a lawyer's predatory precision. "You're in the guest room again, Chloe," Jason said. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. "You've been spending a lot of time in here. Is there something wrong with our bedroom?" "I was just looking for some old linens," I stammered, my pulse spiking. "The air conditioning is a bit aggressive tonight." He didn't move. He stood in the doorway, blocking my path. "You've been acting erratic for weeks. The photography, the constant errands, the way you flinch when I touch you." He stepped closer, his shadow stretching across the floor. "I'm a litigator, Chloe. I get paid to find the things people try to hide. And right now, you're hiding something." "I'm not hiding anything, Jason," I said, trying to keep my voice from trembling. "I'm just stressed about the move to the cabin." "Is that so?" He pushed past me into the guest room. My blood ran cold. He walked straight to the bed and began tossing the decorative pillows aside. "Then why did I get a notification from our service provider about a secondary device attempting to ping the home network?" "I don't know what you're talking about," I whispered. He reached into the headboard. Time seemed to slow down. I watched his fingers disappear into the fabric, the exact spot where I had shoved the burner. My lungs seized. If he found that phone, the game was over. I wouldn't just lose the evidence. I would lose my life. Buzz. The sound came from the nightstand, not the headboard. Jason froze, his hand inches from the hidden phone. He turned and saw my official iPhone vibrating on the table. "A text," he muttered, picking it up. He swiped the screen. He knew my passcode, of course. "It's from your mother. She wants to know if we're coming for brunch on Sunday." He tossed the phone back onto the table, the suspicion in his eyes flickering but not fading. Don't play games with me, Chloe. I've worked too hard for this life to let your nerves ruin it. If you're having another breakdown, I need to know now so I can make arrangements. I'm fine, Jason, I said, my voice finally cold. I'm just tired of being interrogated in my own home. He stared at me for a long beat, then turned and walked out without another word. I sank onto the edge of the bed, my legs giving way. I reached into the headboard and pulled out the burner. It was silent, dark, and terrifyingly close to being discovered. I hit the side button, a prearranged signal. 10 seconds later, my iPhone lit up with a notification. It was a message from a no-reply address. The perimeter is clear.
Breathe.
I clutched the burner to my chest, tears of sheer terror pricking my eyes. I was living with a man who was already planning my accident, but for the first time, I wasn't alone in the dark. The screen of the iPad was a glowing portal into a world that should have been my future, but was now his execution dock. I sat in the darkness of our townhome, the only light reflecting off my face, watching the high-definition feed from the cabin. The silence in my living room was absolute, save for the frantic, rhythmic thrumming of my own heart. On the screen, Jason and Elena were already there. The vacation home looked beautiful in the soft evening light, but through the hidden lenses, it was a den of thieves. Jason was pacing near the stone fireplace, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. Elena sat on the edge of the leather sofa, her eyes fixed on the heavy briefcase sitting between them. The client is 5 minutes away, Jason said, his voice coming through the hidden mics with chilling clarity. Once we hand over the ledgers and accept the final deposit, the offshore transition is complete. The firm's senior partners won't know they've been hollowed out until we're already in the chairman's seats. And the loose ends? Elena asked, her voice sharp and cold. Miller was one thing, Jason. But Chloe, she's becoming a liability. She's staring at you like she's looking at a stranger. Chloe is an easy fix, Jason replied, his tone as casual as if he were discussing a grocery list. She's fragile. A tragic accident at this very cabin, perhaps a faulty gas line or a slip on the ravine, and I'm the grieving widower with a massive insurance payout and a clean slate. I've already scouted the perfect spot on the trail. I felt a wave of cold fury wash over me. He wasn't even hiding it anymore. In his mind, I was already dead. Suddenly, a black sedan pulled into the driveway. A man in a tailored dark suit stepped out, carrying a smaller metal case. This was it. The client, an undercover federal agent who had been working the periphery of the Miller Group, now guided by the breadcrumbs Caleb had dropped. Gentlemen, Jason said, opening the door with that practiced winning smile. Let's get to business. They moved to the dining table. I watched as Jason opened the briefcase, revealing thick, vacuum-sealed bundles of $100 bills. He began sliding ledgers across the table, the physical proof of years of racketeering and embezzlement. Is the Miller matter fully resolved? The agent asked, his voice a low, steady rumble. My associates don't like lingering shadows. Miller is buried under 6 feet of concrete at the Highlands construction site, Jason said, leaning back with terrifying arrogance. He's as permanent as the foundation of that building. You have my word. That was the confession. My hands shook as I realized we had it, not just the money but the murder. Now, the agent said, standing up. I think it's time to settle the bill. Before Jason could respond, the front door and the rear glass sliders exploded inward. Flashlights cut through the dim room, and the air was filled with the deafening roar of authority. FBI, get on the ground. Hands behind your head. Jason's face transformed in an instant, from the king of the world to a cornered rat. He lunged for the briefcase, but a red laser appeared squarely on his forehead. He froze, his mouth hanging open in a silent, pathetic scream of realization. Elena was already on her knees, her face pressed into the rug she had picked out just weeks ago. Then I saw him. Caleb stepped into the frame, wearing a tactical vest with investigator, emblazoned across the back. He didn't look at the money or the agents. He walked straight to the smoke detector where the primary camera was hidden. He looked directly into the lens, his gray eyes burning with a fierce, protective light. "We got him, Chloe," Caleb said, his voice a steady anchor in the chaos. "He's never going to touch a lighter again." I watched as the agents forced Jason to the floor. His cheek was pressed against the expensive hardwood, the handcuffs clicking shut with a finality that echoed in my soul. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, I let out a breath that didn't feel like smoke. The fire was out. The courthouse was a cold, cavernous monument to a justice I had once thought was impossible. I sat on the hard wooden bench, my spine straight, wearing a suit of navy blue, the color of a clear sky, not the charcoal gray of a funeral. Across the aisle, Jason sat at the defense table. The rising star had finally burned out. His expensive suits had been replaced by a drab, oversized blazer provided by his legal team, and his skin had taken on the sallow, sickly hue of a man who realized that his silver tongue couldn't talk his way out of a federal indictment. The trial had been a surgical dismantling of his life. The jury had watched the panopticon footage from the cabin, the high-definition betrayal, the casual discussion of my accident, and the chilling confession regarding Marcus Miller. When the audio of Jason bragging about Miller being permanent foundation played through the courtroom speakers, a collective gasp had sucked the air out of the room. "Jason Vance," the judge began, her voice like the strike of a gavel even before she held one. "You used your knowledge of the law to subvert it. You treated your marriage like a business acquisition and your wife like a disposable asset. For the racketeering, the embezzlement, and the cold-blooded murder of Marcus Miller, I sentence you to life in prison, without the possibility of parole." Jason's head snapped toward me. For a split second, the mask slipped. I saw the monster from the fire, the man who had watched me choke on smoke with a smile. His lips curled into a silent snarl, a promise of a violence he could no longer reach. "Take him away," the judge commanded. As the bailiffs led him out, I didn't feel the surge of triumph I had expected. Instead, I felt a profound, bone-deep lightness, as if a lead weight had been lifted from my lungs. I walked out of that courtroom, and, for the first time in 2 lifetimes, I didn't look over my shoulder. Caleb was waiting for me at the bottom of the stone steps. He had stayed true to his word. He had been my shadow every single day of the trial, standing at the back of the room, his eyes never leaving me. He had left the fire department for good, trading his yellow helmet for a private security firm he had started with a few of his veteran contacts. "He's gone, Chloe," Caleb said, his voice a low, grounding hum as I reached him. He reached out, his hand steady and warm as he took mine. "It's over. Truly over." "I want to go to the ocean, Caleb," I said, looking up at him. "I want to be somewhere where the only thing I can smell is salt and fresh air." We left the city behind that afternoon. I sold the townhome and the furniture, donating the proceeds to a foundation for victims of domestic violence. I didn't want a single thread of that life touching my skin. We found a small, weathered cottage on the rugged coast of Maine. It was the opposite of the cabin. No glass walls, no clean lines, just sturdy cedar shingles and a wide porch that groaned in the wind. A month after the sentencing, we sat on that porch, watching the sun dip into the Atlantic. Barnaby was asleep at our feet, his paws twitching as he chased dream rabbits. Caleb sat beside me, his fingers interlaced with mine. "You know," I said, leaning my head on his shoulder, "in the other life, I didn't even know you existed until the moment I died. I saw your face in the smoke, and I thought I was hallucinating an angel." "I wasn't an angel," Caleb whispered, his grip on my hand tightening. "I was a man who failed his job. I've lived with the memory of that fire, of your face, every day. Even when this life started, I couldn't explain why I was so drawn to a woman I'd never met. I think my soul recognized yours before my eyes did. You saved me, Caleb. You quit your whole life to be my shadow." "I didn't quit my life, Chloe," he said, turning to look at me, his gray eyes soft with an intensity that made my heart swell. "I started it. Protecting you wasn't a job. It was the reason I was given a second chance, too." He leaned in, and when he kissed me, it didn't taste like fear or desperation. It tasted like home. I looked out at the dark water, listening to the rhythmic crash of the waves. The fire was a distant memory, a flicker of heat in a past that no longer owned me. I had been drugged, betrayed, and burned to ash, but like a phoenix, I had found a way to rise. And this time, I wasn't standing in the ruins alone. "I love you, Caleb," I whispered into the salt-heavy air. "I've loved you across 2 lifetimes," he replied. "And I'm going to spend the rest of this one making sure you never have to be a ghost again." The clock had reset, the nightmare was dead, and as the stars began to poke through the twilight, I finally closed my eyes and slept, the deep, dreamless sleep of the truly free.